All right, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Nils Andersen, who is the CEO of the Maersk Group. I am told that at any given point, 4% of global commerce, the things that make up the global economy, are being transported on some vessel or vehicle operated by this man's company. So he's got 4% of the global economy running at every moment through his company. That's really big. And let's remember the container ship industry is not that old, actually. It's about 50 or so years old, and it's really revolutionized the world. But looking ahead, one of the things that Nils Andersen does is talk about a 100-year vision. We've talked a lot about short-term, long-term. This is a business leader who is trying to build a company that thinks for the very long term, even though we know that rising and falling consumer demand, commodity prices, energy prices have thrown quite a lot of uncertainty and change into our worlds and his business over the last 5 or 6 years. So this is a great opportunity to hear how this company helps make the economy go and hopefully go in more sustainable directions. So join me in welcoming Nils Andersen.
Thank you very much, Aaron. So thank you very much, everybody. And I've just been listening to the last plenary discussion, or the discussion here, and heard more abbreviations than I heard for a long time, and I realized that I'm on shaky grounds here. Whatever I say maybe old or wrong or whatever. But I would like to talk about trade today, and contrary to what I thought CSR and sustainability was about 7-8 years ago, I realized today that what we're trying to do as a company, we're actually running a business that is all about improving the world. We are the largest transportation company in the world, and what we do helps improve people's lives every day. It helps bringing jobs to poor regions, to poor countries, integrate them in the world economy, and it helps consumers in the richer world to get goods at more affordable prices. So we're creating wealth, we're creating progress every single day. So what I'm trying to talk to you about today is not how we do something bad and we try to do it a little less bad. It's about that we're doing something we're very proud of, and we're trying to do it in a way that we can be even more proud of and be even more sustainable. So well, I'm probably the only one who can see this. No, it's there as well. So what is the agenda that I would like to talk to you about? And one is, of course, what is the international effects of global trade? What are the obstacles and opportunities that we see? And what is it that we are doing where we try to take the sustainability hat on and try to expand without actually using more resources than absolutely necessary in doing that job. So just a little bit about the Maersk Group. You'll see here a few data. We have what we call 5 strategic businesses. The most important one, and what I'll be talking mainly about today, is Maersk Line and also APM Terminals, is the transportation business. We're also in oil, we're also in oil services. It's Maersk Drilling, and then we do an awful lot of other shipping businesses that we put together in one business units that we call A.P.Moller Shipping Services. So that's what we're about. We have 89,000 colleagues around the world. We're active in 135 different countries, and in some of those countries, we are one out of maximum 3 international companies operating. So that also tells you why it's so important that we get people involved, that we train people and so on, because we are, in those countries, we are the company that helps employees, that helps our colleagues grow, educate them, and make sure that we can run businesses in those countries. We do $47 billion of turnover, and last year a little less than $4 billion of profit. So a relatively sizable company, and certainly an important company in the space of transportation. And being in the space of transportation and sea transportation makes us in ourselves a very important player in the global economy, because 90% of trade moves on ships. Aaron alluded to that. At any point in time, 4% of global GDP is probably on board a ship, hopefully one of ours, and that is a very important thing. And our company is probably a little bit more important to global growth and global economy, because we spend significantly more money than most investing in infrastructure and growing trade in the developing world. It's been a strategic driver for us in the last years, both for profit purposes, but also because of the need to do something for these regions where lack of infrastructure, and I'll come back to that, is actually a key bottleneck to achieve growth and get integrated into the global economy. So just a few comments on what trade can do. I would like to talk only about what trade can do, and I mentioned some of it at the opening. We enable weak countries, we enable people that come from poor backgrounds to enter the global economy to increase their standards of living. We enable production of high quality goods in cooperation between a lot of countries. In that sense, we in a way are also contributing to global peace by involving or linking the countries together. And on top of that, as I said before, keeping prices down, making sure that normal consumers in the mature markets can access affordable goods. What transportation and global trade, of course, does not secure is how the gains are split within the countries. I've heard the argument a few times that, well, if there's more wealth in a country, there will be people that are not part of this wealth generation because they don't get jobs or they don't get education or whatever it is. There is a fear that some people are left behind. I would argue that when a society gets more wealthy, in any case, it gives better chance to everybody in that society, at least when the wealth creation is based on trade. If it is not based on trade, but on utilization or exploitation of raw materials or oil, or if it's a feudal agricultural society, of course things may look different. But if it's based on trade, there's pretty much a guarantee that it will be spread out and there'll be plenty of jobs, because that's just what trade is all about. It creates more businesses. Investments is a very important part of this picture, and because there are many obstacles to trade. You can ship, and when we live in developed markets, it's hard to understand that it can be a problem to ship from China to the US or from Rotterdam to Los Angeles or to Port Elizabeth in Newark, just south of this place. But actually, in many parts of the world, this is just not the case. And there is a huge demand for infrastructure. On this picture, you'll see to the left, you'll see a picture of the port of Apapa, which is the main port in Lagos of Nigeria, taken in 2006. And those of you who were involved in global politics and business at the time will remember that that was a time where the oil boom was going on. A lot of ships were waiting outside Apapa port in the Bay of Lagos. There were pirate attacks and so on. They were in some cases waiting months to get to shore. That meant, of course, that it was impossible to create a business in Lagos depending on global trade, because the agricultural people could not get their goods out of the country, and people who wanted to do industry and production could not get their spare parts and raw materials in, so it was a real stoppage for the economy. At that time, you can see the picture. I can tell you that nobody knew where the containers were. There was, since people were waiting days and nights to get, or weeks to get their goods out, There were hairdressers and restaurants and everything blossoming in the port. The only thing that didn't move was the containers. Fortunately, that has been changed. You'll see in the upper side here, you'll see how the port looks today. It's under expansion, and it moves 1.2 million containers in and out. Waiting time for the ship 0, and in the vicinity of the port, 30,000 jobs have been created just in assembly factories and things like that. And of course, inland, lots of agricultural export has been enabled, like coffee and so on. So very, very important. I have a couple of other examples, because this was just creating the opportunity for Nigeria to involve its population and not just the oil moguls in the global economy. This is another example. What you see here is a terminal in Santos, which is the most important shipping area in Latin America. 4 years ago, when I was there the first time, this was a chemical dump. There had been dumped chemicals and industrial waste there for 50 years. No wildlife of any kind was living there. I was there 2 weeks ago, and the first person I met was actually our biologist, who told me that we were well on the way to get some of the 132 species back in the mangroves that we had planted, and fish under the piers and so on, coming back to live in a now healthy environment. We've dug out polluted earth down to a depth of 15 meters to clean it up and make sure it became a clean area. And today, this is able to take approximately 40% of the port business in Santos. We've created thousands of jobs in and around the terminal, and we're educating young people from the slum in Santos in environmental management in that same facility. So another example, how it says here that cost of waiting was 700 million in the port for delays and so on. That's of course not only cost of shipping time, it's also pollution from trucks and ships waiting to get to the terminal. And here's another example that I'd like to show you. But before I do that, I'll say that we decided to go in and build a port, or renovate the port in Liberia shortly after the war had ended. The UN or the US government surveyed a bidding process. We won, and we got in and built a new terminal. And I would like to show you a small movie where this lady explains what having a job and being part of the global economy means. So can we play the video?
To be a mother is a great thing. You have to love your children, send them to school, make sure they come out good in life, because when your children come out good, you become a proud mother. So I'm happy for that. I am a multi-scale operator, operating my machines, every machines in the port.
Everything you see in Liberia basically comes through this berth. So if this berth had any issues whatsoever, the country could starve, literally. So the importance of it cannot be underestimated. We bring in skills, we bring investments, especially in the early years. It is a business, but we give so much value for that business. To develop this place, develop the people. And this is not just a short-term partnership, this is a partnership that goes on for 25 years.
The port, particularly the Monrovia port, is extremely important to the Liberian economy. The fact that the port is working efficiently is in itself a sign that Liberia is on the right path, I think, for growth. And it must be growth that generates jobs, and it must be jobs that pay wages that can address the poverty situation in the country.
I pray that some of my friends could be like me one day. Yes, because a lot of friends out there don't have job. I feel I can no longer go down easily. Yes, so I feel like I'm a hero.
Of course, you all know that Liberia today is center of the Ebola epidemic, and Jacqueline is not infected like 99% of people there are not, but they all depend on us operating this port, which we do, which I'm proud to say that we do, taking all precautions and so on. But both our shipping business and the port business continue operating and making sure that we can help people there. And we also have donated $1 million to the Ebola LET effort. So, thank you. The container as such, Aaron mentioned it, is 50 years old, but it's a fascinating thing that the invention of a box, of a steel box, and the idea of putting it on a ship can mean so much. And it's probably one of the globally most important innovations that have been taking place in the last 50 years. When the box was put on the market, the value, or the part of the value of a traded good, was 30% of transportation. Today it's 1%. And that means that when we look at all the discussions we have today with WTO and the Trans-Pacific Partnership or Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, we put all these things together, they will do less, even if fully implemented, than this box. So a very, very important thing. And for us, of course, it means the basis of our business, and it's something that we keep innovating on to enable even more trade and even more progress. And I have a few examples here. We produce reefer containers, and the first innovation that was done on this box was actually that people invented or came up with the idea that you could actually freeze it, so it could be used for frozen fish or frozen meat or frozen vegetables, and that expanded the market. Now what we can do in addition to that, we can also transport fruits. We can put fruits to sleep in a container by taking out the ethylene, which makes them make a banana go from green to yellow. So we can control that. By doing that, we've also expanded the life of an avocado, which is another example, in a container from 10 to 40 days. And that enables actually avocado farmers in Kenya to grow products for Europe, which means they can get 3 times as much for an avocado. And this has generated in the last years, together with a lot of other things like improving roads, teaching them how to cover the lorries that transport the avocados to the container, and a lot of other things have helped actually start a business worth 300 million and change the lives of quite a lot of people. So maybe we could play a short movie on that one as well.
Ona gacoka ngaririkana mahinda marĩa ndambĩrĩirie ũrĩmi. Warĩ wĩra mũritũ mũno na ndieciragia nĩ wakorwo wĩna umithio. No tũngĩramata tĩri ũyũ rĩ, thutha-inĩ nĩ tũgakena. Tĩri nĩguo mũtũrĩre wa andũ. No nĩ ũndũ wa ũteithio wa arĩa tũnyitanagĩra nao rĩ, rĩu nĩ tũrahota kwendia matunda thĩ yothe. ona mabũrũri tũtarĩ twathiĩ. Na rĩu tondũ thoko nĩ ĩragĩra, twĩna mweke wa kũhanda mĩtĩ mĩingĩ na tuone mbeca cia gũtwara cukuru ona college.
Avocado exports from Kenya have been increasing significantly over the past few years. Last season, we actually did 870 containers, and this coming season, we are looking to do 1,000 containers, which translates to 100 million avocados.
Before, we could only take fruit where the transit was less than 10 days. With Maersk Line containers, then we can take fruit out to Europe in 25 days, some up to 40 days on sea to Russia. Basically, the market has expanded based on the fact that we can take the fruit further.
My farm is like my friend or the greatest friend, and also it's my helper, another way.
So it's possible to improve even a box. And these are just one of many examples. So you can also, when you get some flowers from your husband next time, or your wife, sorry, you probably get a bad conscience because it takes a lot of CO2 emission to transport those flowers by plane. But I can tell you now that maybe they've been transported in a Maersk container. It takes a month, maybe, but you cut 90% of the CO2 emission and you can't tell the difference. So, exciting business. And then I come to the enabling trade, because trade is threatened. It's threatened by many things. I don't think it's threatened so much by industry today, although there's still a lot of protectionism. So people want to protect their businesses against too much competition, which is good for industry. It's bad for the consumer and for normal people, but it still happens. But actually today it's also the consumer that in many cases are very worried about what is this all about. But actually we made a number of calculations in a lot of different forums. This one is the global, the World Trade Organization saying that we can improve the global GDP by 1.2 trillion if we take away just half of the trade barriers. So that corresponds to something like a 5% growth in global GDP at relatively little pain. What we're discussing now on the TTIP, which is trade between US and Europe, probably 1% of GDP probably means that everybody in the US and in Europe could have, let's say, $500 more per family and several millions of jobs. So there are plenty of opportunities, but also quite a lot of obstacles that has to be overcome. And we're working on that, not only to invest in infrastructure, but also working on the tariff agreements, working on other obstacles to trade. And I'll give you an example that you probably don't think would be a real problem. But every time a container with avocados travel from Kenya to Europe, actually the cost of exchanging telexes, looking at it, handling papers, discussing, takes as much cost as the cost of the transportation. So that's worth thinking about. So making customs more easy, more simple, automating, making sure we're better integrated IT system is really a driver of wealth that is possible. One last thing I would like to discuss or mention is also that all of you knows that transportation requires consume fuel, and thereby it also leads to emission of CO2. And when I came to my company in 2007, it was just before the COP15 in Denmark, and the papers were full of articles saying that Maersk pollutes CO2-wise just as much as the rest of Denmark. My first reaction was to say this is ridiculous, because Denmark is a very small country and Maersk is a very large transportation company. But I realized quite quickly, helped by my wiser colleagues, that that would be a hard sell in the press. So we actually we started thinking about what we could do about it, and realizing that you're part of the problem is actually a good place to start. So what we did, we started with this argument here that shipping is actually much better than any other transportation that exists. If you take, these are the grams emitted per ton mile of transportation. Air freight 540 grams, a heavy truck 50, and heavy truck doesn't mean it pollutes more than a light truck because it's the most effective way. A small ship 21 grams, and the larger ones, we can say the average size, 21. So we actually pollute about a third of already today, about a third of a truck, and of course immensely much less than any kind of flying around. And then we started on a journey. We went out in 2007, and this was basically to support the COP15 because it was in Denmark, so we felt an obligation. Said we will go out and we will save 20% CO2 per container that we transport, and we'll reach that by 2020. And that was, and we felt very uncertain about how this was possible, but working on it, we realized that that was actually easily doable. Already today, we have reduced our consumption with 35%, just 7 years later. And we will today launch a message that we will commit to, by 2020, to have reduced the CO2 consumption or emission by 60% for any container we transport around the world. So that means that for the first time it's possible to say that we've decoupled growth from energy consumption in the shipping business. It means that we will, by 2020, be transporting 80% more goods than we did in 2007, consuming 40% less energy. So I think that's quite important, and I think it is also an example of how you can do, even if you feel you do the right thing, if you concentrate a bit, you can also find ways of doing it better. And if I may, just as a last comment, we never do anything which we believe is just for sustainability. We try to find ways of combining sustainability with improving the business. So if you would be very cynical about this, I would say, well, my purpose is to save fuel because that makes me more profitable, but I would actually prefer my employees around the world to get out of bed trying to create a better world, trying to reduce the consumption of fuel because they want to reduce the emission of CO2 than because they want to give a little bit more profit or a lot more profit to the shareholders. But the problem is, if anybody expects businesses like ours to go out and do things which is just good for sustainability, then we end up in a situation where, yes, we do sustainable things as long as we can afford it to, and then we stop. So I think the challenge for industry and the challenge for all of you is to encourage finding ways where you, by doing sustainability right, actually improves your business. Then it's sustainable. Thank you for listening, and I hope I didn't bore you with a too long presentation. Well, now I'm fired up. Do you want me to sit down?
You're welcome to stand.
Thank you. I look taller then.
Well, we can stand up. Either way, it's your choice.
Let's stand.
I was already thinking that maybe on my way back home I would take one of your large tankers instead of an airplane.
Yes,
based
much
on
better.
Yeah. So I'd like to ask you how you put an avocado to sleep, but I'm going to save that for another time. This is a great achievement and a great goal, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you achieved it. So I hope everyone understood that's 80% increase in volume and an absolute reduction of 40%. It's not 40% more efficient on larger volumes. It's an absolute savings, which is not easy to accomplish. So well done. And how did you make it happen?
Well, I think first and foremost, thank you. First and foremost, what we did was we got everybody engaged in it, and it's not one thing. The most significant thing was that we reduced the speed on all trade lanes with this argument that's the only way to reduce CO2 emissions. But we did a lot of other things. So we redesigned vessels, we redesigned anti-fouling paint, we developed systems that help the captain make the ship balance in a different way. We are now sailing, taking into account the current. We're looking at global streams in the ocean, where does the current take? Because it makes quite a big difference if the current is against you with 3 knots or it's with you in 3 knots. Things like that, which I think has made the captain's job a lot more fun. And then we've done something which has not made it so much fun. We prohibited him to sort of pull back the accelerator and boom. So it doesn't get that sense of Ferrari-like acceleration, unfortunately. But many things, and I think the big difference is really that people, once they get inspired by this, they get out of bed in the morning and say, this is really, really exciting.
You've also built some very large ships, the Triple E. You want to tell people a little bit about that and how do those contribute to better efficiency?
Yeah. We came up with the Triple E's actually as part of this, the original job was to build a ship that was a task we gave to our innovation people. Build a ship that's same size as the largest we have today, but consumes 25% less fuel. And then they went away for some months and came back with this vessel that was actually 20% larger, but also consumed about 50% less fuel than the average ship on the Asia-Europe trade. And it was done there were a lot of things. So we installed 2 engines instead of 1. It was a real rethinking of how a ship operates. They're also bulkier and so on. So that was one thing, but at the same time, they apparently have been bitten by the bug of making a better world. They also created a recyclability passport. So that means that every single part of this vessel, and it's a huge thing, I mean, very impressive, every single item is numbered and put in a passport, and when the ship is going to recycle, it's not going to happen on a beach. Somewhere it's going to happen under controlled circumstances, and everything on board can be reused. So it's the first, you can say, a life cycle passport.
I think Ellen MacArthur, if she's not here, should come back, because this, I don't know, shipping and circular economy with very large ships is very exciting. Super slow shipping, I know you referenced that. When I first heard about it, I thought, well, that can't be very appealing to your customers. You're telling them that the journey time is going to be longer than it was before. Yeah. How does that work?
Well, the good thing is that the fuel price has gone up. So it actually costs quite a bit of money to sail faster. And our customers want things fast, but they also want it cheap. So we sell them, unfortunately, if you want it faster, you have to pay more, and then usually they shut up.
Yes. That's you just reduced weeks of business school to a very short comment.
I don't want to be quoted outside this room. I assume we're among friends.
I'm sure
here.
None of your customers are here in the audience. Do you see a future where renewable energy is used to move these ships?
I think at the moment we just have to realize that bunker fuel, bunker oil, is a very effective fuel, you can say many of the alternatives that you're looking at, like I mean, we've been looking at biofuels, and you can also animal fats, and there are lots of things that you could imagine that could work, but it's quite expensive transformations. So you could imagine LNG that doesn't liquefied natural gas, but that of course is not renewable as such. But I have problems, things like kites and sails, and it's a little bit hairy.
Yeah. And we'll come back in 50 years and see about that. I'm going to ask a couple more questions now, but I also want to say we should have microphones around the room. Can people raise their hands if they're going to be holding mic? There's one back there, Nadia. Over here, I think that's Alice. That's at least, oh, yeah, thank you. And Cami right there. Okay, so you've talked, so the theme of the conference, transparency and transformation. Let me ask about transparency, because you've talked about how you've wanted Maersk to become a more transparent company outside. Why do you think that's important? What do you think that delivers? And how do you make that change culturally?
Well, first and foremost, I think it's a right that our employees have to work in a company where they know what's going on. We also have a number of investors who have a right to know what we're thinking about, what, not necessarily every single plan, because that would then go to competition as well, but they have to have an idea. So I think the thing about being transparent, I think is something that self-evidently is needed. But if I could say in the context of sustainability, I think it has helped us from the beginning, because when we launched the first 20% fuel reduction target, people came up and say, well, you know, why don't you do more? Why don't you invest here and you do this and that? And why don't you use biofuels and all these things? And we were very transparent from the beginning. We said to them, we cannot do anything that is not helping our business. Mm-hmm. We can say, okay, if there's an environmentally correct investment to do, then we'll accept a lower return than we do on a normal ship. Mm-hmm. And so we say, okay, a payback time for a ship should be 10 years. For an environmental investment on the ship, so that can be heat regeneration or electricity generation or whatever, we accept the life of the ship as a payback. But we cannot do more than that, because then we start becoming uncompetitive, and then we'll have some steamer from a developing country that doesn't care about CO2 quotas or anything out competing us, and that's not serving neither our interest nor the interest of the world. So we've been very transparent about that, and if I can add, also, we have 3 pillars in our transparency strategy that we work very hard on now. One is the energy consumption and CO2, very clear link to profitability. The second one is people, education and training of people, which serves us very well, because, as I said at the opening, 25 countries in the world with basically at least one of very, very few modern companies. So to help on education, invest even in country education there, is hugely beneficial to our own industry. And it's also hugely beneficial to another target that we have, which is employee safety. And then, I think that's basically, just as examples, we try to do things that is good for the business, so we can keep doing it, and the more we do, the stronger our business gets.
Great. Let me see if there's a question. I'm also going to say, if we have time, we should have some time. If we have questions via Twitter, hashtag AskBSR14. Do we have a question from the audience? And I think I may have one here. Anyone have a question for Nils? Oh, yeah, thanks. Erica, let us know who you are, please. I already know who you are, but...
Erica Karp from Cornerstone Capital. Nils, formerly of UBS. It's nice to see you. Just a question. Many executives who are maybe not as enlightened as you and your senior executive team seem to say that Wall Street, the investors, don't ask questions about sustainability. Now, some of us think that that's actually just a language issue, but from your perspective, are investors asking the long-term material questions on environmental, social, and governance factors, or are they still in totally short-term oriented and asking how your quarter is?
I think we're seeing it sometimes, and after the last quarter presentation, I was in Paris and seeing an investor, and there was a lady sitting there who was their analyst within sustainability, and she had decided that they should cut our stake in half, and they had done it. And the background for that is that she felt that we had too many fatalities in our ports business, and she's right, because any fatality is too many. We're probably among the best in the ports of industry, and we're doing a lot, but I think that's an example that it happens. Maybe I should be a little bit clear on it. We don't run our company because of what investors say, or we, as Aaron said, we have a 100-year perspective, and it's not kidding. That is really being a company owned by a foundation. My job is to make sure that this company can live and be a company that the family can be proud of in 100 years. But I think it was a good point, and of course we immediately took contact to her and explained to her the background. But I think it was an example that it is coming up in at least in Europe.
And it is true that a lot of companies in Denmark who are considered leaders do have different ownership structures than you find in other parts of the world.
But I think it's also a matter of the way business is conducted in the Nordic. Not that we do it better, but we probably have a little bit more this background of saving on energy and all these things.
Great, we've got a question over here.
Hi, Aaron Koch. I'm from Semper Energy. Thank you so much for a great speech. Just a quick question. You've probably gotten this one before. It's probably not new, but how do you respond to the kind of local argument that it's better if local communities locally produce what they locally need, as opposed to shipping things great distances, even if you're super efficient? Thanks.
Well, I think it depends on who is saying it in what context. If it's a scientific debate, I think it's quite easy to demonstrate that the wealth goes down if you try to isolate markets, even big markets, from the rest of the world. So I think it's easy you can say with figures to demonstrate that trade is good. Trade and exchange of ideas and collaboration is good. If you're at a dinner table, you have to come up with some stories. Like it could be that it's difficult to grow avocados in Denmark, and if you like avocados, you like some trade. But actually, there are also some studies that have been made. I don't know whether they're still valid, but as an example that it's better for the environment to raise or produce lamb in New Zealand and transport it to Europe than it is to grow it in Europe. It's better to take a tomato from Africa, ship it to Europe than it is to grow it in a greenhouse in Europe. All these things are, I mean, you can serve those at dinner tables. If you want a list, we can help you.
Right. We have a question back here.
Hi, I'm Anne Florini from Singapore Management University and Brookings, and I wanted to ask you about the relationship between your company and governments. You talked a lot about your role in creating port infrastructure. Infrastructure is usually considered to be a government responsibility. Where I live in Singapore, they're in the process of relocating their entire port, which is a fairly major undertaking. You're talking about redesigning your ships so they fit into the circular economy. Is there any discussion going on between your company and the governments that are responsible for building and operating ports about how to make the whole process more sustainable, including the port infrastructure?
It differs, of course, from country to country how the dialogue is, but actually we are in constant discussion with Singapore, and as you probably know, that we left the port of Singapore to go to Malaysia some years ago, so we had a bad dialogue with them for some years. But we are trying to go into these discussions. When you talk about our own ports business, we operate 60 ports around the world, and we operate them all as a guest of a country. That's also the way we see it. The country is our customer. Of course, the ship owners and the people who want to transport goods are the primary customers, but the ultimate customer is the country. And if we take the Liberia example, before we started building the port, I was down to see it, and it was quite a mess. It was just after the war, and it really looked at it as if it's been bombed, but it was actually a big tanker vessel that had run half the pier down. People were walking around without safety vests, without helmets, and there was no proper lighting there, which is a problem. in that part of the country, of course, or that part of the world. Having seen all that, we had won the concession. I went to see the president, and we had a discussion, and she was very concerned about how our attitude to safety was, and I explained her how a proper dressed person working at the pier would, or at the port would be, and how we would fence in the port and make it a safe place to work. And as her last comment was, are you actually planning to build the port on time? I said yes, and because that is the main thing that we do. So we do work very closely with governments, and we built the port. It was finished before time, at 50% larger capacity than we had promised. Higher investment as well, but it's full already.
We've got a question right here. While the mic is coming over, I've got a question from Ashley Nixon via Twitter. How is LNG, or can LNG help you in achieving your big emissions reduction goal?
Yeah.
Where does it fit in now?
We don't plan for LNG in that emission goal, but LNG has the advantage over oil or bunker oil that it doesn't contain CO2 or SO2, sulfur, and it emits less CO2 than traditional bunker oil. So just using LNG instead of bunker oil would help us cut CO2 emissions. The problem is that the technology for tanks and the fueling network globally is not completely developed, and the tanks take up much more space, so you actually reduce the amount you can ship. But we're looking at it constantly, but it's not part of the 60%.
Do you work with energy providers in technology development to enable new forms of fuel, or is that their issue? Is that your issue? Do you work jointly?
We follow it very closely, but we don't believe actually that there is a lot of new development in fuel. It's about cleaning what we have. With the new emission rules, you cannot emit sulfur, you cannot emit NOx. So we have to work with fuels that are cleaner than we did before, and we're working on that.
Let's go to the questioner right here.
David Lawrence from Sockway. First of all, congratulations on your impressive reduction figures that you're talking about there. I'm just interested if you cast out in your 100-year plan when you stop doing less bad, and at what point you start to actually turn things the other way around. Have you thought about when you're going to start reducing the total amount of global trade, so we reduce the total amount of ships moving around the world, and how are you thinking about that?
Well, thank you for the question. I fundamentally disagree with the foundation for your question, because I actually believe that trade is good. For the reasons I mentioned before, it creates wealth, it creates jobs, and it keeps down cost. And as also said before, there's no proof that you can actually reduce CO2 emissions by moving production of most of the goods we produce around the world by very much. So I just don't agree to the fundamentals.
The premise is that by continually just reducing your emissions and your energy, you are still just doing less bad. At some point, you have to start saying, no, we'll look at things differently, and our business will be other sorts of trade. Yes, trade is good, but how do we change it into different ways so that we can still have some energy and still move some things around?
Well, again, I don't agree with the premise, but if the amount of global trade goes down, we'll of course reduce our capacity. As long as the amount of trade is growing, we'll be proud to transport it as energy efficient as we can.
Question back here.
Hello, Nils. Thank you for the presentation, which was excellent. I'm Peter Leach with the Journal of Commerce, and I wanted to ask about your customers. How are they reacting to your plans for cutting emissions, and are they including those cuts in their green supply chains, which I understand more and more companies are measuring themselves on the greenness of their supply chains?
Our customers, I think in general like what we're doing, or I know they in general like what we're doing, and we do things like calculations of how much CO2 footprint their supply chain is releasing. So we actually we actually do those calculations for them, and we did it. We've done it for the last 7-8 years. It's a service that is in demand, and we know that it's included in their greenness, so to speak. They're not willing to pay us for it, so it's not that you can say, I tried that a few times with some of our customers, going to them and saying, okay, we talked about becoming more green, here's the way to become more green, would you please pay us $100 more per container? And then I don't get sort of a huge applause. But we do try it, so the customers are keenly interested, but they're not willing to pay for it.
Great. I've got a couple more questions, and then I need to sit down. We've got one from Twitter and one I'd like to ask you. David Rankin writes to say that Maersk has been a leader in keeping organisms, I assume this is alien organisms, organic organisms, out of your ballast tanks. Is that becoming an industry-wide approach?
Yeah, it's going to be legally something you have to do by law. So we're all working with different ways of cleaning our ballast water, and also working on ways to potentially reduce the use of ballast water significantly. Not that it's a consumption, but since shipping was invented, ships have been transporting water from Europe to the US and back and so on. So probably most organisms have been transported a few times, but with global warming, actually there is a risk that organisms that come from places can go to new places where they can survive, which they couldn't do before. So it's something to take moderately seriously, and we do it.
My last question, and been asking this question to some fellow CEOs who've been here. There was an article in the Guardian a couple of weeks ago that spoke of the myth of the omnipotent CEO, pointing to the notion that while of course CEOs have a great deal of influence, you're not an emperor, you're a CEO, there's a difference. How do you view that idea and the kind of leadership that you have to make the kinds of change happen that you want to see happen?
Well, I think first and foremost in the area of sustainability, I'm being led by others. I'm not an expert in sustainability, but we do have a very clear vision in the group. We call it our values, on how we want this group to develop and so on, and sustainability fits in there. It's part of what we have always done and what we'll do in the future, so we take inspiration from that.
Great. I started with an editorial comment. I'm going to end with one. We've been really privileged to work with Maersk, and I think your company reflects one of the ideas that Indra Nooyi talked about this morning, both cooperation and competition. And we've seen Maersk get out ahead on several things and show that leadership and achieve competitive advantage. And you've also been very, very good about trying to find collaborative solutions that can raise the level of performance across. So we applaud you for that and look forward to continuing in supporting. And now, let's be collaborative. Everyone join me in thanking Nils Andersen.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Pleasure.